The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it did every morning. David rolled out of bed, his body already aching before the day even began. 3 years of working double shifts had taken their toll, but he couldn't afford to slow down, not when his mother's medical bills kept piling up on the kitchen counter like a mountain he couldn't climb. He splashed cold water on his face and looked in the bathroom mirror. 28 years old, but the stress lines around his eyes made him look older. His college diploma hung on the wall behind him, a constant reminder of dreams that felt further away each passing day. Business administration degree from State University. 4 years of studying, hoping, planning for a future that never came. "Morning, Mama," he called softly as he passed her bedroom door. She was still sleeping, which was good. The diabetes had been getting worse lately, and the doctor visits were becoming more frequent. More expensive, too. David grabbed his work uniform from the closet. Black pants, white shirt, black tie, the same outfit he'd worn for 3 years at Rosewood Fine Dining. It wasn't a bad job, he told himself. The tips were decent, especially on weekends. But decent wasn't enough anymore. The bus ride to work took 45 minutes through the city. David watched the neighborhoods change as they moved from his modest area to the wealthy district where Rosewood sat like a jewel among boutique shops and art galleries. The restaurant served the kind of people who spent more on one meal than David made in a week. He walked through the employee entrance and tied his apron around his waist. The kitchen was already bustling with prep cooks chopping vegetables and seasoning sauces. The smell of fresh bread and herbs filled the air, reminding him why he'd once dreamed of opening his own place. "You're late," snapped Kevin, the floor manager. His voice carried that familiar tone of someone who enjoyed having power over others. "I'm 5 minutes early," David replied, checking his watch. "Early is on time is late, and late is fired. Remember that." Kevin adjusted his tie and walked away, leaving David to wonder how someone so unpleasant had ended up managing a fine dining establishment. David began setting up his section, tables 7 through 12, each one perfectly arranged with crisp white tablecloths, polished silverware, and fresh flowers. He folded napkins into perfect triangles and filled water glasses until they sparkled under the soft lighting. The lunch shift started slow. A business meeting at table 9. 2 ladies discussing charity events at table 11. David moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders, serving food, clearing plates. He smiled when he needed to, laughed at customers' jokes even when they weren't funny, and bit his tongue when they treated him like he was invisible. At table 10, a woman complained loudly about her soup being too cold. David apologized and had the kitchen prepare a fresh bowl. When he brought it back, she barely looked at him as she waved him away. No thank you. No acknowledgement that he'd fixed her problem. Just a dismissive gesture like he was a piece of furniture that had served its purpose. During his break, David sat in the employee parking lot and called his mother's doctor's office. The receptionist's voice was polite but firm. They needed payment for last month's visit before they could schedule the next one. David promised to call back with a payment plan, knowing he'd have to figure out where the money would come from. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his banking app. Checking account, $423. Savings account, $87. Rent was due in a week, and his mother's medication cost $250 a month. The math never worked out the way he wanted it to. The dinner shift brought its own challenges. Table 8 sent back their steaks twice, claiming they weren't cooked properly. David knew the kitchen staff was getting frustrated, but he kept his voice calm as he apologized and placed the order for a 3rd time. The customer's patience was wearing thin, and he could see them exchanging glances that suggested his tip was disappearing with each trip back to the kitchen. At table 12, a wealthy businessman made a joke about David's accent, mimicking the way he pronounced certain words for his dinner companion's entertainment. David's jaw tightened, but he forced another smile and asked if anyone needed drink refills. The man laughed again and made another comment about these people not understanding proper English. By 9 o'clock, David's feet felt like they were on fire. He'd been walking and standing for nearly 12 hours straight. His lower back ached from constantly bending over tables, and his face hurt from smiling when he didn't feel like smiling. He finished cleaning his section and counted his tips for the day. $138. Not bad, but not great either. After taxes and tip sharing with the kitchen staff, he'd take home about $90. It would help, but it wouldn't solve anything. As he walked to the bus stop, David pulled out his old notebook where he kept restaurant ideas. He'd been writing in it since college, sketching floor plans and menu concepts for the place he wanted to open someday. A restaurant where the staff would be treated with respect, where good food brought people together instead of creating barriers between them. The bus was mostly empty on the ride home. David stared out the window at the city lights and thought about his day. 3 years of the same routine, the same struggles, the same dreams that felt like they were slowly slipping away. He'd applied for management positions at other restaurants, but they always wanted someone with more experience or better connections. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "How was work today, honey?" He typed back that it was fine, that everything was going well. She had enough to worry about without knowing how tired he really was, how scared he was about their future. When David finally made it home, his mother was watching television in the living room. She looked up and smiled, and for a moment, all the stress of the day seemed worth it. This was why he worked so hard, why he kept going even when everything felt impossible. "There's dinner in the refrigerator," she said. "I made your favorite." David kissed her forehead and sat down beside her on the couch. Tomorrow would bring another double shift, another day of challenges and small humiliations. But tonight he was home with the person who mattered most. That had to be enough for now. Friday nights at Rosewood were always crazy. The restaurant buzzed with energy as wealthy diners filled every table, celebrating business deals, anniversaries, and social gatherings. David moved quickly between his tables, balancing plates and taking orders while trying to keep up with the constant demands. The host station was backed up with reservations, and people in expensive suits and designer dresses waited impatiently in the lobby. David noticed the tension in the air. When rich people had to wait, everyone felt their frustration. "Table 9 needs more bread," called out Jessica, another server, as she rushed past with a tray of drinks. "And table 11 is asking about their appetizers." David nodded and made a mental note. He was already juggling 6 tables, but Friday nights meant everyone had to work harder. The money was better, but so was the stress. As he delivered salads to table 10, David saw Kevin, the manager, greeting a new customer at the host station. An elderly man in a wheelchair was being seated, and David could see other staff members exchanging glances. Nobody wanted to serve the table that might take extra time and attention. "David," Kevin called out, "you're taking table 7. Table 7 was right in the middle of David's section. As he approached, he got a better look at the customer. The man appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His hands shook slightly as he tried to position his wheelchair closer to the table. "Good evening, sir," David said with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Rosewood." The man looked up, and David noticed he seemed surprised by the warm greeting. "Thank you," he said softly. His voice had a slight tremor, but his eyes were alert and intelligent. David noticed the man struggling to reach the menu that had been placed on the far side of the table. Without making a big deal of it, he moved the menu closer and adjusted the small table lamp so the lighting was better. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" David asked. "Water would be fine," the man replied. "Ice water, if you don't mind." When David returned with the water, he noticed the man was having difficulty reading the menu. His hands shook as he tried to hold it steady, and he squinted at the small print. "Would you like me to go over some of our specials tonight?" David offered casually. "We have a wonderful salmon with lemon herb sauce, and our chef makes an excellent beef tenderloin." The man's face brightened. "That would be very helpful, thank you." David pulled up a chair and sat down at eye level with his customer. He explained each dish patiently, describing the flavors and ingredients without rushing. Other servers walked by, some shooting curious looks at the unusual scene of a waiter sitting with a customer. "The salmon sounds perfect," the man decided. "I haven't had good fish in quite a while." "Excellent choice," David said. "How would you like that prepared?" "The chef can make it however you prefer." As David placed the order, he noticed some of the other customers staring. A woman at table 9 whispered something to her companion while looking in their direction. A businessman at table 12 shook his head and muttered under his breath. It's about the restaurant's standards. David tried to ignore the looks and comments. He focused on doing his job well, just like he always did. When the food arrived, David noticed the man was having trouble cutting his salmon. His hands shook too much to manage the knife effectively. Without being asked, David stepped forward. "Would you like me to cut that for you, sir?" he offered quietly. The man's eyes filled with gratitude. "That would be wonderful." I hate to be trouble." "No trouble at all," David assured him as he carefully cut the fish into bite-sized pieces. "There you go." As the evening progressed, David checked on the table regularly. He brought extra napkins without being asked, refilled the water glass before it was empty, and made sure his customer had everything he needed. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite. David could see he was enjoying the meal, and that made him feel good about his service. When other customers complained or acted rudely, at least this one table was a pleasant experience. During a quiet moment, the man spoke up. "You know, young man, this reminds me of dinners I used to have with my wife. She loved this place." "How long were you married?" David asked as he refilled the water glass. 52 wonderful years, the man replied with a sad smile. "Eleanor passed away 6 months ago. This was her favorite restaurant. We came here for every anniversary." David felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. She must have been very special." "She was," the man said quietly. "She would have liked you. Eleanor always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they treat others, especially when they don't have to be kind." The comment stuck with David as he continued working. At table 9, the woman who had been staring earlier complained loudly about having to wait for her dessert. At table 12, the businessman snapped his fingers to get David's attention, then criticized the temperature of his coffee. But at table 7, there was only kindness and appreciation. The elderly man thanked David for every small service, complimented the food, and treated him like a valued person rather than just a server. When it came time for dessert, David learned that the man had difficulty with fine motor skills due to Parkinson's disease. Simple tasks like holding a spoon steady or opening sugar packets were challenging. David helped discreetly, making sure his customer could enjoy his meal with dignity. Other staff members whispered among themselves. Some seemed annoyed that David was spending so much time with one table. Others looked uncomfortable with the situation, unsure how to handle a customer with special needs. Kevin, the manager, walked by several times, watching David's interactions with obvious disapproval. During a brief moment in the kitchen, he pulled David aside. "You're spending too much time at that table," Kevin said. "Other customers are noticing. We can't have the dining room looking like a nursing home." David felt his anger rise, but he kept his voice level. "He's a paying customer who deserves good service. Just keep it professional," Kevin warned before walking away. David returned to his section determined to continue providing excellent service to all his tables, but especially to the man who appreciated it most. As the evening wound down, he brought the check and noticed the man had left a generous tip along with a handwritten note. "Thank you for your kindness and professionalism. You made an old man feel welcomed and valued. Eleanor would have loved meeting you." When David looked up, the man was being helped into a taxi by the restaurant's valet. Through the window, their eyes met for a moment, and the man gave a small wave goodbye. David folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. In a job where he often felt invisible or unappreciated, this one interaction reminded him why he had chosen hospitality in the first place. It wasn't just about serving food. It was about serving people, treating them with dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances. As he cleaned table 7 for the next customer, David found himself hoping the elderly man would come back. In a restaurant full of difficult customers and challenging situations, meeting someone who appreciated simple human kindness had been the best part of his night. 3 weeks later, David was setting up his tables for another Friday night when he saw a familiar face at the host station. The elderly man from table 7 was back, sitting in his wheelchair and speaking quietly with the hostess. David felt genuinely happy to see him again. "Mr. Patterson," the hostess said as she approached David's section. "Your usual table is ready." David smiled as he walked over. "Good evening, Mr. Patterson. It's wonderful to see you again." The old man's face lit up with recognition. "David, I was hoping you'd be working tonight. I specifically requested this table." "Well, you've got it," David said, adjusting the chair across from Mr. Patterson so he could position his wheelchair comfortably. "Same drink as last time. Ice water." "You remember," Mr. Patterson said with obvious pleasure. "Yes, please." "And maybe you could tell me about tonight's specials?" Over the next few weeks, Friday night dinners became a regular tradition. Mr. Patterson would arrive at 7 o'clock, always requesting table 7 in David's section. They developed an easy routine. David would bring ice water without being asked, move the menu closer, adjust the lighting, and patiently describe the evening's offerings. Each visit, David learned more about Mr. Patterson's life. He discovered that the old man lived in an assisted living facility across town and rarely left except for medical appointments and these weekly dinners. His children lived in other states and visited infrequently. These restaurant visits were often the highlight of his week. "Eleanor and I used to come here every Friday for 20 years, Mr. Patterson told David one evening. After she passed, I stopped coming for months. But sitting at home feeling sorry for myself wasn't what she would have wanted. David began to understand that these dinners were about more than just food. They were Mr. Patterson's way of staying connected to happy memories, while fighting the loneliness that came with losing a life partner. As their friendship grew, Mr. Patterson became genuinely interested in David's life too. He asked about David's family, his dreams, and his challenges. David found himself sharing things he rarely talked about with anyone. "I went to college for business," David explained one evening as he cut Mr. Patterson's chicken into manageable pieces. "Always dreamed of opening my own restaurant someday. Somewhere that felt welcoming to everyone, you know?" "That's a wonderful dream," Mr. Patterson said thoughtfully. "What's stopping you?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Money, mainly. Student loans, my mother's medical bills, rent. I can barely keep up with what I have, let alone save enough to start a business." Mr. Patterson nodded knowingly. "Life has a way of testing our patience, doesn't it? But good things come to those who don't give up on their dreams." Not everyone appreciated David's attention to Mr. Patterson. Other customers sometimes made comments about the extra time he spent at table 7. A wealthy businesswoman once complained to Kevin that her service was slow because David was too busy playing nurse to handle his other tables properly. Kevin pulled David aside after that incident. "Look, I get that you're trying to be nice, but other customers are starting to notice. Maybe you should suggest he try somewhere more appropriate for his needs." "His needs are the same as any other customer," David replied firmly. "He wants good food and respectful service." "I can provide both. Just don't let it affect the rest of your section," Kevin warned. The comments from other customers got worse over time. David overheard a man at table 9 telling his date that the restaurant was going downhill because they allowed people like that to dine there. A group of women at table 11 made loud comments about how the spectacle was ruining their dining experience. David's co-workers had mixed reactions too. Some admired his patience and kindness. Others thought he was wasting time on a customer who probably didn't tip well anyway. A few seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation and avoided table 7 when Mr. Patterson was there. But David refused to change his approach. Every Friday at 7 o'clock, he made sure table 7 was perfectly set up. He memorized Mr. Patterson's preferences: ice water with lemon, salmon cooked medium, vegetables steamed but not soft, and coffee with cream but no sugar. One evening, Mr. Patterson arrived looking more tired than usual. His hands shook more noticeably, and he seemed to have trouble following the conversation at first. "Are you feeling all right tonight?" David asked with genuine concern. "Just a rough day," Mr. Patterson admitted. "The medication makes me foggy sometimes. Maybe I should just order something simple." "How about the chicken soup?" David suggested. "Chef makes it fresh every day and it's easy to eat. I can ask him to put it in a mug instead of a bowl if that would be easier." Mr. Patterson's eyes filled with gratitude. "That would be perfect. You always know exactly what I need." As the months passed, their weekly dinners became the highlight of both their weeks. David would often stay past his shift to make sure Mr. Patterson wasn't rushed. They talked about everything from Mr. Patterson's late wife to David's dreams for the future. "Eleanor would have loved you," Mr. Patterson said one evening. "She always said the measure of a person isn't how they treat their equals, but how they treat those who can't do anything for them." "I'm just doing my job," David replied. But Mr. Patterson shook his head. "No, son. What you're doing goes far beyond any job description. You're treating me like I matter, like I'm still a person worth knowing. That's becoming rarer these days." David learned that Mr. Patterson had been a successful businessman before retirement, though he never spoke about specifics. What mattered more were the stories about his marriage, his regrets about working too much when he was younger, and his advice about not letting dreams die just because they seemed difficult to achieve. "I made a lot of money in my career," Mr. Patterson told him one evening. "But the happiest moments were always the simple ones. Dinner with Eleanor, watching sunsets, talking with people who saw me as more than just a business deal. One Friday, Mr. Patterson didn't show up at his usual time. David kept table 7 open, checking the door every few minutes. By 8 o'clock, he was genuinely worried. Mr. Patterson was never late without calling. When Mr. Patterson finally arrived at 8:30, he looked exhausted and was accompanied by a younger man in a suit. "I'm sorry I'm late," Mr. Patterson said as David helped him get situated. "I had an important meeting that ran longer than expected." The man in the suit sat down across from Mr. Patterson and pulled out a briefcase. David brought water and menus, but he could sense this wasn't going to be a typical dinner. "David," Mr. Patterson said, "I'd like you to meet my attorney. Mr. Collins, we have some business to discuss tonight, and I was hoping you might join us when you have a moment." David felt confused but nodded. As he served other tables, he wondered what kind of business Mr. Patterson could possibly want to discuss with him. When things slowed down later in the evening, Mr. Patterson gestured for him to sit down. "What I'm about to tell you might come as a surprise," Mr. Patterson began, his voice more serious than David had ever heard it. David sat down slowly, his heart pounding with uncertainty. Mr. Patterson's serious expression was unlike anything he'd seen during their months of friendly dinners. The lawyer, Mr. Collins, opened his briefcase and pulled out several official-looking documents. "David," Mr. Patterson began, his voice trembling slightly, "there are some things about me that I haven't shared with you. Things I probably should have mentioned sooner." David leaned forward, worried that something was seriously wrong. "Are you okay? Is this about your health?" Mr. Patterson managed a small smile. "In a way, yes. I've been dealing with more than just Parkinson's disease. 6 months ago, my doctors found cancer. Pancreatic cancer. The treatments aren't working the way we hoped they would." The words hit David like a physical blow. He'd grown genuinely fond of this kind old man who had become the bright spot in his work week. "I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" "Actually, there is," Mr. Patterson said, glancing at his lawyer. "But first I need to tell you who I really am." David waited, confused about what Mr. Patterson could possibly mean. "My full name is Harold Patterson, but most people knew me as the founder and former owner of Patterson Hospitality Group. We owned and operated 37 restaurants across the state before I sold the company. 15 years ago." David's eyes widened. He'd heard of Patterson Hospitality Group. They were famous for their high-end restaurants and exceptional service standards. "You owned all those restaurants?" "Built the company from nothing," Mr. Patterson confirmed. "Started with one small diner 40 years ago and grew it into something much bigger. Eleanor was my partner in everything. She designed the interiors, I handled the business side." Mr. Collins cleared his throat and spoke for the first time. "Mr. Patterson has been observing your work here for months. He's been very impressed with your character and your natural understanding of hospitality." David felt overwhelmed. "I don't understand. You've been watching me?" "Not watching like you think," Mr. Patterson said gently. "When I first came here after Eleanor died, I was lost. Angry at the world, bitter about being alone. Most people treated me like I was invisible or worse, like I was a burden." He paused to take a sip of water, his hands still trembling. "But you were different from the very first night. You didn't see a sick old man in a wheelchair. You saw a customer who deserved respect and good service. You treated me like I mattered." David shook his head. "That's just basic human decency." "You'd be surprised how uncommon basic human decency has become," Mr. Patterson replied sadly. "Do you know how many restaurants I've eaten at in the past year? Dozens. Do you know how many servers treated me the way you do? One, just you." Mr. Collins pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Patterson has been making some important decisions about his estate. He has no children and his wife passed away. He's been looking for the right person to entrust with something very special." "I don't have much time left," Mr. Patterson continued. "The doctors say maybe 6 months, possibly less. I've spent the last few weeks getting my affairs in order, and I've made some decisions that I hope will honor Eleanor's memory while helping someone who deserves a chance." David's mind was racing. "Sir, I appreciate whatever you're thinking, but I can't accept anything from you. You've already given me so much just by being a friend," Mr. Patterson smiled. "You haven't heard what I'm offering yet?" Mr. Collins opened the folder and pulled out a set of photographs. "These are pictures of a restaurant property downtown. It's been closed for 2 years, but the building is in excellent condition. Full commercial kitchen, dining room that seats 80 people, private parking. David looked at the photos, his breath catching. The restaurant was beautiful, with large windows, exposed brick walls, and a warm, inviting atmosphere. It's gorgeous, but I don't understand why you're showing me this. Because I'm giving it to you, Mr. Patterson said simply. The words hung in the air like something impossible. David stared at him, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Collins pulled out more documents. Mr. Patterson is transferring ownership of the property to you, along with enough money to renovate and operate the restaurant for the first 2 years. Everything you need to make your dream come true. David stood up so quickly his chair nearly fell over. No, I can't accept that. That's crazy. I'm nobody. I'm just a waiter who was nice to you. You're not just anything, Mr. Patterson said firmly. You're a young man with dreams, talent, and most importantly, character. You have everything it takes to run a successful restaurant except the opportunity. I'm offering you that opportunity. But why me? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You barely know me. I know enough, Mr. Patterson replied. I know you work 2 jobs to take care of your mother. I know you treat everyone with respect, regardless of whether they can do anything for you. I know you have a vision for the kind of restaurant you want to create. He paused, his eyes growing distant. Eleanor and I never had children. We poured our hearts into our restaurants instead. When I sold the company, I thought that chapter of my life was over. But meeting you made me realize I have one more chance to help someone build something beautiful. Mr. Collins spread out the legal documents. These papers transfer ownership of the building, along with a trust fund that will provide operating capital. There are a few conditions, but nothing unreasonable. David sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. What conditions? The restaurant must maintain the highest standards of service and food quality, Mr. Patterson explained. You must treat all customers with respect and dignity, regardless of their background or circumstances. And once a month, you must provide a free dinner service for residents of local assisted living facilities. David felt tears forming in his eyes. I can't believe this is real. It's very real, Mr. Collins confirmed. Mr. Patterson has been planning this for months. He's had investigators look into your background, your character, your work history. Everything checked out perfectly. You had me investigated? David asked, not sure whether to be flattered or concerned. I had to be sure, Mr. Patterson said. This is a big responsibility, and I needed to know you were the right person. But honestly, watching how you treated me week after week told me everything I needed to know about your character. David looked around the restaurant where he'd worked for 3 years, where he'd struggled to make ends meet while dreaming of something better, the very place where he'd met the man who was about to change his entire life. Why don't you take some time to think about it? Mr. Collins suggested. This is a big decision, but David was already shaking his head. I don't need time to think. If you're serious about this, if this is really happening, then yes. Yes, absolutely. Mr. Patterson's face broke into the biggest smile David had ever seen from him. Eleanor would be so proud. She always said our purpose in life was to help others achieve their dreams. As David signed the papers with shaking hands, he realized that his simple act of treating an elderly customer with kindness and respect had just changed the entire course of his life. Sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest miracles. 6 months later, David stood in the doorway of his own restaurant, still hardly believing it was real. The space had been transformed from an empty building into Eleanor's table, a warm and welcoming restaurant that honored both Mr. Patterson's late wife and David's vision of inclusive hospitality. The renovation had taken 4 months of intense work. David had poured his heart into every detail, from the soft lighting that made everyone low, their best, to the comfortable seating that could accommodate customers with mobility challenges. The kitchen was state-of-the-art but designed for efficiency, allowing his small staff to prepare fresh, high-quality meals without the stress he'd experienced at other restaurants. Tonight was opening night, and David felt a mixture of excitement and terror as the first customers began arriving. He'd invited Mr. Patterson to be the guest of honor, though his health had declined significantly since that night at Rosewood, when he'd changed David's life forever. Mr. Patterson arrived in a medical transport wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse from his hospice care facility. He looked frail and tired, but his eyes still sparkled with the same kindness David remembered from their first meeting. David, Mr. Patterson said softly, as David knelt beside his wheelchair, this place is even more beautiful than I imagined. David looked around at the restaurant he'd created. The walls were decorated with photos of families and friends sharing meals, representing the diverse community he hoped to serve. Each table had fresh flowers and warm lighting. The open kitchen allowed customers to see their food being prepared with care and attention. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "You would have found a way eventually," Mr. Patterson replied. "I just helped it happen sooner." The dining room filled quickly with a mixture of food critics, local business owners, and people from David's neighborhood who had heard about the restaurant's mission. David had made it clear from the beginning that Eleanor's table would welcome everyone, regardless of their economic status or background. At 7 o'clock, David gathered his staff for a moment before the dinner service began. He'd hired carefully, choosing people who shared his vision of treating every customer with dignity and respect. Several of his servers had worked at chain restaurants where they'd felt undervalued. Others were culinary school graduates looking for their first chance to work in a quality establishment. "Tonight isn't just about serving food," David told his team. "It's about creating experiences that make people feel valued and welcome. Remember that every person who walks through that door is someone's family member, someone important to somebody." The evening service went better than David had dared to hope. The food was excellent, prepared by a chef who had worked at some of the city's finest restaurants, but was excited to be part of something more meaningful than just another high-end establishment. The customers seemed genuinely impressed not just with the food, but with the atmosphere David had created. Conversations flowed easily between tables. Families with children felt comfortable, while couples on romantic dates found intimate corners perfect for quiet conversation. But the moment that meant the most to David came when he saw an elderly couple being seated at table 7, the same table where he'd first served Mr. Patterson. The woman was using a walker, and her husband was helping her get situated. David watched as their server, following the training he'd provided, approached the table with patience and genuine warmth. Local news coverage of the opening was overwhelmingly positive. Food critics praised both the quality of the cuisine and the restaurant's inclusive atmosphere. The business reporter noted that Eleanor's table was already booked solid for the next 3 weeks, but the review that meant the most appeared in the community newsletter. An elderly woman wrote about bringing her husband who had dementia for dinner. She described how the staff had been patient when he became confused, how they'd treated him with dignity even when he couldn't remember what he'd ordered. "This is how all restaurants should operate," she wrote. "They made us feel like valued customers, not problems to be solved." David implemented the monthly free dinner service for assisted living residents, just as Mr. Patterson had requested. The first event brought 30 seniors from 3 different facilities. David watched as many of them lit up at the chance to dine somewhere special, to be served restaurant-quality food in an elegant setting. One woman, about Mr. Patterson's age, approached David after the meal with tears in her eyes. "I haven't felt this special in years," she said. "You made me remember what it feels like to be treated like a lady." As word spread about Eleanor's table, David began receiving calls from other restaurant owners asking about his approach to inclusive hospitality. He was invited to speak at culinary schools and hospitality conferences about creating businesses that served their entire community. 3 weeks after opening night, Mr. Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep. David spoke at the funeral, sharing stories about their weekly dinners and how one man's kindness had changed everything. The church was packed with people whose lives Mr. Patterson had touched throughout his long career in hospitality. Following Mr. Patterson's wishes, David established the Eleanor and Harold Patterson Scholarship Fund for students from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to study culinary arts or hospitality management. The fund would ensure that other young people with dreams but limited resources would have the opportunity to pursue careers in the industry. 6 months after opening, Eleanor's Table had become one of the most successful restaurants in the city. But success wasn't measured just in profits or reviews. It was measured in the thank you notes from customers who felt truly welcomed, in the staff members who took pride in their work, and in the community that had formed around shared meals and mutual respect. David often thought about that first night when he'd served Mr. Patterson at Rosewood. He'd simply done what felt right, treating an elderly customer with the respect and kindness every person deserved. He never could have imagined that small act of basic human decency would lead to this. Standing in his restaurant each evening, Watching families and friends gather around tables laden with good food, David understood what Mr. Patterson had meant about finding purpose in helping others achieve their dreams. The gift wasn't just the building or the money. It was the chance to create something meaningful, something that made the world a little bit kinder. Eleanor's table became more than just a restaurant. It became proof that simple acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict, creating opportunities and changing lives in the most unexpected ways. And every Friday at 7 o'clock, David made sure Table 7 was set perfectly, honoring the memory of the man who had taught him that treating people with dignity wasn't just good business. It was the foundation of a life well lived.